Okay, this is Jimmy DeResta here. We have a voiceover for the Whirly Geek video, and we have a very special guest. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Derek from Malden.
Derek's here at my house, and we're going to do a voiceover together. So what I started here with is 3/4 inch pine. I asked Brett to pick up the pine with no knots in it from the special aisle. You know that aisle on Home Depot?
No, I don't use Home Depot, but thanks.
Oh, you don't?
No.
So a lot of people may or may not notice. You see what I'm doing here? I'm gluing up a block of wood, and I'm putting a nail in the corner so it stops sliding around. And you have to remember not to bandsaw that corner, but of course I didn't, and that's the corner I started from. But I glued 5 together, then 2. You see that? So
Yes.
that has like 2 various different thicknesses, because I knew the arms would come out of one and the body was going to come out of the other.
So that wasn't a magic trick when they came apart?
No. And it's so funny. I have 4,000 hammers, and look, I'm using my shop brush to do that. You know what? I'm going to do a video where I make a shop brush with a hammerhead on it. There you go.
Shh.
Mallet.
Don't put that out there. Somebody might steal it.
Yeah, you might. Now, see, I'm starting slow, and that's right where all the nails are, right at the feet. But because I'm using an aggressive saw blade, it made its way through all those nails without even. I didn't notice until I was well into the carve that I was carving through all the nails I put in. My intention was to cut that last couple of inches off and not use it.
But at least you know that saw blade will cut through nails.
It's funny because I didn't realize I was cutting through nails until it was like well over, and I was like, oh wow. So you see what I've done there? I turned the saw off to remove that piece. It's too dangerous. It doesn't get bundled up in the corner.
Safety first.
Yeah. Now this is just some old school bandsaw techniques for me. I used to do this when I was a little kid, bandsawing like this all the time. That's how I really started doing the bandsaw carving, and just making toys for myself when I was a kid. And I learned early on all the ways that the blade can get bound up.
Yeah.
That's why it doesn't happen to me.
That's good to know, because it does happen very easily.
Yeah, if you're cutting the high side stuff, if you're not well supported, it'll come snapping down against the table. It's kind of like, even though it's not really an exact, it's kind of like high siding on a motorcycle.
Yeah, it's funny because I noticed you still use little pieces to wedge underneath
Yep.
to hold it up right there. You just did that?
Yeah. Did you have a high side on a motorcycle?
No.
You never did?
No.
I have.
Why?
I high sided on an XL6 650 XLR dirt bike.
So you used to be cool.
I used to be cool, yeah, when I used to actually used to ride my motorcycles and not just stare at them.
Sometimes it's fun to stare at them. I'll bring mine up. We can stare at both of them.
Yeah, $20,000 stare at machine. So this is the body, and the one thing that really helps me a lot with all this is all my anatomy classes when I was in art school. So people always say, "Oh, how do you know how to just whip up a body?" I took like almost 3 years of anatomy at School of Visual Arts, and I never ever mastered it. There were other kids that drew perfect, and it always drove me crazy. But I guess I was like, all I'm ever going to really need to do is make cartoony figures that chop wood, so it doesn't matter.
It's good because I use that as an excuse why I'm not good at anatomy, because I've never taken a class.
Yeah, well, it works perfect. And so here, I'm looking at it, and I'm realizing, that's right when I realized like the body wasn't the right shape.
Yeah.
Oh, and I also cut the legs in half. At one point I realized, you know what, I'm painting this thing, so it doesn't matter if there's a bandsaw mark. And in fact, because it's a YouTube video, it doesn't matter if there's a bandsaw mark. No one's going to see it. It's not a Fabergé egg. And even if it was, I just figure out a way to disguise the cut. So, people get a big boner for the idea of, oh, it's all made out of one piece of wood. That's nice for some guys that want 30 million view viral videos, but I'm really going more for function than anything else. And look, I'm just joking around there. Brett was laughing. I was having fun playing. And if you notice, see, I cut the outside of the fists off and glued them to the inside to make the hands curved in. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Nobody really noticed that. I did a little feature of it, and then I ended up carving most of it away, so that's why I didn't really feature it. But it is a good technique. You see, so now the fists are, ultimately it ended up adding about 1/4 inch to the width of the fists when they come together. But it's really unrecognizable. That's why I didn't add it to the video.
Yeah.
And doing 2 things that are symmetrical, it's important to do them at the same time. You notice how I'm removing one, then I'm removing the similar spot on the other one?
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of figuring it out as I'm going. And then this is my Mongo giant disc sander. And all those bandsawed surfaces, I just put a flat marker on with the big sander. It really helps a lot. And now this is a trick I learned from an old furniture maker. He said just tape things together, because he always had weird furniture frames.
Yeah.
And it looked a little...
stretch wrap.
Oh yeah, stretch wrap works really well too.
Good, too.
Yeah, and in this little instance, it's funny. My first impulse was to get stretch wrap, and then I realized it's like too big and too small. And this is where I do the wedge solve.
Love that. Love that technique right there.
You know, it's so funny. And when I was a kid, my dad had this toy, and it was a golfer on the end of a long stick. Do you remember having that
Yeah,
in the
I know
70s?
exactly what you're talking
He's
about.
like had a yellow shirt and red pants,
Yeah.
and you pulled the
Yeah.
trigger and he swung.
Yeah.
This is where I got this like
It's funny because
mechanism
that's what
from.
it looks like.
It looks exactly like that guy. This is where I got that like that, and I didn't realize I was thinking about it till I was into it. I was like well into it when I'm like, oh man, this is just like that golfer.
Yeah.
So I started remembering all the details about that golfer.
I love here how the wedge just disappears. Now it's
Oh,
part
yeah.
of the waist.
Yep. That was, and then you see all the bandsaw marks, which I knew I could disguise later. This is just a steel rod I had in my little bucket of rods. And I drilled the hole a couple times here in the edit. I leave out all the times I attempted to get the right angle. There you can see there's 2 holes at the neck. Now this is just a rough cut piece of oak, I think it is. No, this is a piece of spalted maple. This is just, I wanted a live edge, but it kind of gets lost in all of it. And right here, this is really me thinking, and then we stopped and took a break and said, oh, it'd be funny if we find a Jackman pallet. And yeah, so we just
Funny,
whipped
when
that.
I watched, I missed that whole thing.
What?
I don't
Me
know
measuring it?
No, you getting the small pallets.
Oh, you thought it just showed up on camera?
Yeah, I don't know.
And so that's just nailed and glued. I actually have to put a screw in it because in the final shots it got loose. And that's one of those shuhito or shinuto or shiliuto rasps. I forget what they're called, but it's all a bunch of saw blades all riveted side by side.
It's easy for you to say.
I know. I need to be Japanese to be able to say that. And now I'm carving with an old just wide scoop, but it's really important when you carve, you always got to go down the steps. That's what I always say. You got to go down the steps of the grain. You know you're going up the steps because
So you're gonna tear out.
you're going to get tear out.
Yeah.
You get tear out. Now this is the head. You notice in the beginning I used one head, which kind of came out really crappy. So I went and Googled the anatomy of a human head, and I got a couple of pencil sketches, which I just imitated on the wood, and now here I'm just fiddling around with it. So that's the profile. You got to kind of see the end vision. It's hard to see it. I'm looking like that, thinking you're on your way to a head, but then this is where I carve out the eye scallops, and you see how chippy. No pun intended for my dog, but it's so chippy, this wood. You got to really be careful not to chip off the main ingredients for the nose. So I kind of went out, even with a sharp chisel, it's hard to cut across grain with this wood. The grain rings are so wide. It was probably a sapling 2 years ago. Now I'm just putting the chisel texture on it.
That's what I was just gonna ask you.
And again, I'm just finding,
for texture.
just for texture, and I'm going down the steps everywhere. I'm trying to find where the grain will carve nicely because I will be going down the steps of the grain. And I put one drill hole in the head here, and I thought it was perfect. Him looking kind of up at you, like, aren't I doing a good job? That's kind of was like the gesture I was thinking. Like, I thought it'd give him nice happy eyes. And later on I change it, and an interesting happy accident happens. So now this is the mechanism, and I had already made the sketch model, which is on my Instagram, and I had a vague idea of what I wanted to do, and I knew that I had to make it out of brass, and I was about to carve all that out of a big piece of 1/4-inch brass I have. And then I said, what the hell, why don't I just piece it together with the stuff in the scrap drawer? And that's when I looked in the drawer and I found, I did shape those end pieces, the little cap and the screw boss.
It's good with the rods because it has a soft edge.
Yeah.
You know, for it to not bind.
Exactly, because you see the incident is, the angle of incidence there is like both extremes. A lot of people picked up on the epoxy on top of the tape trick again, which is funny. A lot of people commented about it.
Yeah.
So I epoxied it in, and I put some screws underneath. I really try to make sure that wherever the main mechanism was, it was going to have some reinforcement. And there, I just, actually I was going to just do like a zigzag rod, and then what occurred to me is that because I'm making that brass disc, it eliminates any binding. So that brass disc basically creates a guide, like a 360-degree guide, so that the 2 forks going up and down will rub past it and not get bound up on some sort of edge. So that's specifically why I decided to do that. I was like, oh, all I need is just a zigzag in the rod. And it also creates kind of like its own built-in washer for the front side and the back side.
Yeah.
And that's just some solder, electrical solder. Electrical solder where you know the shear force is very limited or very, very slight. So there, you see how that disc creates like a washer for the front and back of its action. So the shear force for electrical solder is like where it's non-existent or where there's no tear force. and there's no big resistance, I just use electrical solder. If it was a big, strong thing I needed to worry about, I would use silver solder.
That's just classic DeRosta right there.
Oh, thank you.
Love it.
Yeah, this was nice. I was real happy. And then I switched to the 300 millimeter lens to make everything more intimate. So most of the video from this point on is shot on a 300 millimeter lens. So the camera's like 25 feet away. And it just, what it does is gives me selective focus where I need it most whenever I'm doing some like small details on the figurine. And now here, this is in the podcast, I talk about setting this up to CNC. And I was like, fuck it, let me just bandsaw them. I only have to make 8 of them.
Yeah.
And I was kind of working in the dark with this. I didn't really know exactly where this was going. Truth be told, while I was working right here, I didn't know how I was going to disguise this big thing. I just figured I'd paint it black.
Yeah.
The pile of wood didn't occur to me till I was like,
Really?
well past this.
Wow.
And it is
It's
like
such a natural fit, the wood. You
I know, I
like,
really wasn't thinking about it.
Yeah.
And now here, I should have soldered all these on, but I didn't want to get the rod all hot while it was already installed in the machine.
Yeah.
I didn't make any provisions to remove it, which is not like me. I usually make shit come apart. And so off camera, I epoxied all of them. So there's epoxy between all like the little valleys and between those 2 tubes on each station.
Yeah.
And I put the tape on it, and then I wrapped the tape with crazy glue. So I kind of did like a little epoxy bind.
Yeah.
I knew there wasn't going to be too much resistance on that.
Yeah.
And I also, in the final part, I waxed the hell out of everything with furniture wax, so that made everything slip. This is funny too, just brainstorming around the shop. I think Brett came up with this idea where I go to the what we call it the axe section. I have a bunch of axes behind me on camera, off camera, and we just find a little Jackman size axe, anti-Jackman size axe. Brett made that, and I'll post a little video ultimately of Brett hammering that out. Brett filmed him making that axe and drifting the eye and stuff. I like squeak sounds, so I was just getting a little bit of a tool boner squeaking that piece of wood into the palm.
God, I'll be able to experience it.
It happens in my mind, not in my pants. And so this is cool. Again, another thing, I'm like, shit, how do I make 4 fan blades be exactly the same? Oh, let me use my Rocklet jig. It's the first time the thing was ever off of a 0. And this is 1/8" plexiglass.
I can't believe this worked.
I can't either. Honestly,
No, I thought it was just going to be way too thin. It looks.
Oh no, I think
proportionally it looks great.
I think it's got a little Lexan in it. The idea was that I was afraid that when you said the whole thing works, I thought you meant the whole thing, because that was my concern the entire time. Mm-hmm. There was just a lot of resistance adding up. Every time I added another thing to it, I was just like, oh, this is just adding so much more cumbersomeness to it. That's a word. And there I did, I sprayed that, and all the overspray went on the other side of the tape, so I had to repaint all the white again. So lesson be learned, tape it all off. And now here I was just starting to set it back. At this point I knew I wanted to do the trees. So I said, all right, first thing to do is set it back with color, and then I'm just bandsawing all these little slices. I actually went back and cut all those slices, probably 2 and 3 out of each one of those chunks, because I needed to. So you see how many more pieces are in there from the last cut? Because I needed to go back. I ran out of branches, believe it or not. With good.
And you needed them thin.
I needed them thin.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would have hung off the edge of the bottom support. And now I came back here. We're in my workshop. We're in my what is this called? My office.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
My laser is in my office because of the winter. I don't want it to freeze the water in the cooler.
I love the furniture in here.
Isn't it nice? You're talking about all the leather furniture that's drawn in my notebook. We're sitting on 2 chairs I got out of the garbage, and that is the truth. I'm sitting on a fancy Herman Miller furniture chair, office chair, that I found in the street with no bottom. Derek's laughing at me. And then I found another bottom in the garbage and connected them. So there you go. And right now the resistance is fairly easy going. I wanted to find a tree with a big bush on top. I was afraid it was going to be too distracting, so that's why I just went with a piece of old lumber. And that's from the backyard. I just set it up so that I found it in my wood pile. That's from the backyard here. And that transition was me just grabbing the camera and swinging it around before I turned it off. So I use those little transitions once in a while. Now I put a glob of glue under there, knowing I wanted to reposition it with 1 nail. So here I'm just kind of finding where it's going to go. There's no SketchUp file for this. Just feeling it out. Okay, that feels good. Let me knock that home. So right now the tree branch just has 1 nail and a big gob of glue under it. This is the brim of the hat, which I bandsawed out. There was no reason to show. I needed to kind of make up for some time. So the brim of the hat is just a piece of the scrap pine from where the head was cut out of. And now I'm just going in there with paints. And my whole vision the entire time was to have this look very folk arty. I wasn't going for some Bobby Duke realism there, because for me that stresses me out. I wish I could, but I just can't. At least I don't have the mindset. I know I can get there if I ever really put my mind to it. So Jackman's got this beard which kind of creeps up under his eyes, so he has to like shave his bottom eyelids. So that's why I had the beard come up. Derek's laughing. And these
Putting it into my beard.
If I did your beard, the whole thing would be walking around on its own. It would be just a beard swinging an axe.
And like a cat, a dead cat hanging from my chin.
And so those boots are supposed to be the Carolina work boots. I didn't put too much effort in there to try and make them look like anything.
Are those the Tim Sway ones, or those the?
No, those are the real other ones.
The real. Okay.
And so what I'm using here is just maybe 100 grit, and I'm sanding the bumps. I wanted to make this look a little weathered and worn, and again a little bit more folk arty. And I thought that was a good compromise to kind of integrate the paint, I think. And now here I'm just welding a little placard or a little stanchion. I took that stanchion to the lathe off camera, even after this shot, and I lathed off the weld so it wasn't all lumpy and bumpy, because I wanted it to spin. Now this is an old trick I learned years ago. Just find the center of gravity by weight, not by visual. Just roll it on a dowel.
It's a great tip right there.
Thank you. And now here we are. So under those washers, I smoothed out you can see a little bit of lathe work there. And there you go. And this is fun. And another trick, I should have put the Carolina logo on the back too, but I could do that before they take it to the first show. Right there, should have had the Carolina logo. I wasn't thinking. I was trying to reduce weight everywhere. And so another little editing trick, right there where I whirly gigged it by hand, I whirly gigged it for about 2 minutes just for the sound. So right there, I'm whirly gigging it just for audio, so that I can then have Brett use the leaf blower just to keep the thing going, because there was obviously no wind, of course, because we needed it. And so we just leaf blowered it, and then I just took out the leaf blower sound and put in the sound of the whirly. You could tell it's a little mismatch, but I was hoping people thinking that their internet was shitty before.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Like, oh yeah. So as long as you see it and hear it, your brain will put it together. And in this day and age, everybody just assumes there's a delay. So, and there it is. I did slow the video up and down to try and match the sound of the whirly gig that I made by hand. Thank you for watching. Derek.
Thank you.
I love you.